around the world. His newest book, and I saw a few of you here with it under your arm, Free Fall, America, Free Markets, and the Sinking of the World Economy, was published just earlier this year. But Professor Stiglitz is one of those rare individuals who's not only influenced the academy, but he's influenced government and policy. He was a member of the Council of Economic Advisors from 1993 to 1995 during the Clinton administration. He served as the council's chairman from 1995 to 97. He then became the chief economist and senior vice president of the World Bank between 1997 and 2000. In 2008, he was asked by the French president to chair the Commission on the Measurement of Economic Performance and Social Progress. In 2009, he was appointed by the President of the United Nations General Assembly as chair of the Commission of Experts on Reform of the International Financial and Monetary System. I could go on for pages. You can see by this brief summary that we are certainly very privileged to have you, Professor Stiglitz, address us tonight as the David Finch Lecturer. I welcome you to the podium. So we'll have the lecture for about 45 minutes, and then we will have questions for about 15. Over to you.
Here it is.
Did you want to lapel?
No, I'm all that, and I just want to make sure this can, oops, yeah. Okay. Well, it's a real pleasure to be here. The subject of my talk is one aspect or one of the many lessons that have come out of the global financial crisis. What I'm going to do is spend the first part of this talk really on basic economic principles about how market economies function. And then the second part, I'm going to be talking about the application of these principles to finance, in particular to trying to make our global financial system work, or at least work a little bit better than it has in recent years. Well, let me begin by talking about the notion of Adam Smith's invisible hand, which is probably the most influential idea in economics. It was in Adam Smith's book, Wealth and Nation, that was written in 1776, which argued that individuals and firms, in the pursuit of their self-interest, would be led as if by an invisible hand to the well-being of society. And it's an idea that really underlays our belief in the free market economy, the notion that firms and individuals in making their own decisions are led to some sense of economic efficiency. Well, it took economists 175 years to prove the sense, figure out what sense was Adam Smith right, and to prove the conditions under which it's true. That was the great achievement of Kenneth Arrow and Gerard Debreu in the 1950s, for which they both got the Nobel Prize. One of the lessons of that research was that, in fact, the conditions under which Adam Smith's insight were actually much more limited than is popularly understood. There are many conditions that have to be satisfied. But probably more influential in understanding the limitations of Adam Smith's invisible hand is actually looking at the behavior of what's happened in the markets. I don't think anyone really believes that the pursuit of self-interest by American bankers, which might be called greed, led to the well-being of everybody in our society. Quite the contrary. It actually led to what you call in Australia the GFC, the global financial crisis. Australia's contribution is this acronym. which is one of the things I will bring back to America. But not only did Americans' financial institutions engage in their pursuit of self-interest, bring on this global financial crisis, if you looked in more detail what they were engaged in, you can't help but be a little bit revolted. Much of the profits of our financial sector was related to predatory lending. They actually picked out the least educated, poorest Americans and sold them products that were inappropriate to them, charging them very high interest rates, and focusing on how to maximize the amount of money they could get out of them. And there's been really some very good documentary movies that really show exactly what they were engaged in. They were also engaged in anti-competitive practices that led to supernormal profits. One aspect of that anti-competitive practices were those associated with credit cards and debit cards. You may not, well, in Australia is one of the few places in the world that have actually dealt with this problem. But in most of the world, individuals don't know that every time they use a debit card or a credit card, the merchant has to pay anywhere from 0.75% to 3 or 4 or 5% to the banks. And the merchant pays it, but of course, there's nothing free in life. The merchant passes it on to all the consumers, including the cash consumers, because a restriction that Visa and MasterCard impose is that the merchant has to honor all cards and cannot let the consumer know how much he's paying and cannot charge him for the benefit, for the right to use that card. So it's a explicit restriction not to allow the price system to work and not to be transparent. So it's in effect a transaction tax. It's a tax on every transaction, but it doesn't go for public purpose. It's a transaction tax that goes to the coffers of the banks. And we're talking about huge amounts of money, $30 billion a year or more that goes to the banks as a result of these fees that are a result of their non-competitive practices. In fact, modern technology allows for the creation of an efficient electronic payments mechanism. It should cost really pennies, fractions of a cent. When you go into a store and buy a good, to transfer money from your bank account to the merchant's bank account. It should really be almost costless to make that transaction, and yet they charge, as I say, anywhere from 0.75% to 3-4% for that transaction. So if there was ever evidence of a failure of competitive market processes, this is an example. Now, it's interesting, in the United States there is a lot of discussion on this issue, and Australia was the one part of the world, one country that actually recognized this problem earlier than others, just like you had better financial regulation more generally than the rest of the world. There were other aspects of what the banks did. Their deceptive accounting was really very impressive. It was very creative, but not in ways that enhanced the well-being of our society. And interestingly, having invested in this creative accounting, they then marketed that creative accounting all over the world and found governments and other firms around the world willing to buy these brilliant ideas. Well, the problem was that while the banks were doing what they shouldn't have been doing, they weren't doing what they should have been doing. And what they should have been doing is actually very important. I mean, banks are very important. Financial institutions are very important to the functioning